The Botswana government will abide by a court decision upholding the decriminalisation of homosexuality. Government had appealed a 2019 ruling abolishing jail sentences for same-sex relationships. It had proclaimed the penalty unconstitutional. Homosexuality had been banned since 1965, with offenders facing up to 7 years in prison. Let's discuss this with the Southern African Litigation Centre's Anna Molai-Chalmers, who joins me now for that conversation. Anna, thank you for your time. Each country, I suppose, in as far as this question is concerned, is at different stages of their journey. I can remember when South Africa passed the threshold that Botswana has now passed. But how significant is it that Botswana has now passed this particular threshold that affirms the standing of people who are gay in Botswana?
Thank you very much for having me. This is a really very, very significant decision for Botswana LGBTQI community, given that the ruling had been made at the High Court in 2018, and the government decided to appeal. So we are very, very excited that the Court of Appeal concurred with the High Court and struck down the specific sections 164A and 164C. So it's indeed a monumental win for members of the LGBT community at a time when there's a lot of discrimination, at a time when people can't access health services, at a time when we are excluded, LGBT are excluded from interventions around COVID, the socio-economic complications that the young LGBT are facing. So it's a fantastic and monumental win for members of the community.
And it's sometimes said that, when a judgment like this comes, it doesn't make the law. It simply just highlights that the law has always been. You've just never recognized it. So in weighing up the penal code that had sentences of up to 7 years for homosexual people in Botswana, for specifically acts of sex between gay people, in weighing that up against the Constitution, was it always a decision that had always been there, waiting for just someone to just lift it up and say, actually, what we did in 1965 and this penal code doesn't sit well with the Constitution we have as a country?
From the arguments that the government put forward, it's the government is saying that the members of the LGBT community are not protected are not included in the protections in the Constitution. So in our view, the presence of those sections were just like a badge waiting for people to be arrested at any time when they they make a mistake or go against those constitutions. So the assertion that has often been held by a lot of people that those laws do no harm, they're just there, they're banging. That's the statement. For us, in our view, it's false. You can't have a law in any penal code and not implement it. And the fact that they are there, they always remain as a noose in members of the LGBT community. Somebody needed to do something. If the government had wanted to remove those sections, they would have long done that. There are currently talks of constitutional reviews, and there has been calls for government to remove those sections in the many, UPR reviews, but no action has been taken at all. Yeah.
So the chairperson of the Lesbians, Gays and Bisexuals of Botswana, Sethunya Musime, quoted here as saying, "This will forever change the landscape of democracy, human rights and equality in Botswana." but will it though? Changing the law is one thing, as we are all discovering, including in this country. Changing the law is one thing, but changing attitudes of society and understandings of ordinary people in various spaces in society, to enable a situation where people's dignity is not subject to our approval or otherwise. How far are we with that conversation? For instance, for people to be able to be openly gay in Botswana and basically enjoy all of the rights that come with being a citizen.
Yeah, you are right that changing the law doesn't always translate to a change in public opinion, and I'm really glad that the Court of Appeal touched on that issue, that public opinion need not dictate whether the law should change, need not dictate whether vulnerable people should be protected or not. So that's a very important point. But also one thing that really, for me, speaks a lot to how the law can change public opinion is when, in 2018, when the High Court ruling was out, there was a barometer that was done that sort of measured whether people can live next to a gay person. The barometer showed a huge change in attitudes. And that was equated to the change, the ruling, the positive ruling. So I think the change in cause, the change in the ruling has an influence in people's perceptions, in people's attitudes. And of course, the ruling as it is now is a tool for organizations such as Lahabibo, human rights defenders, to go out and teach people about the ruling and the decision. Yeah. And that's our job to do. Yeah.
Lastly, what's the next milestone? Okay, now we are at a point where, it's not criminal to be gay, but how far are we from that conversation to the next natural order of this conversation that says, if my dignity is affirmed in democratic Botswana, I should be able to take all sorts of decisions that are private to me, that have to do with my lifestyle and what I want to do and how I want to conduct my affairs. For instance, issues around gay LGBTQIA people being able to get married in Botswana. How far are we from having that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's the responsibility of the LGBT organizations and the community to think through. We have decriminalized, then what? And so far there has been talks around, yes, what you've just said about making the environment and the public spaces enabling for LGBT community and addressing issues around hate speech, hate crimes, correctional rape, and all those issues. So they are already thinking about, how to ensure that as we move towards constitutional reform in Botswana, how are we going to include all these aspects of hate crime, hate speeches, and so forth? Because there's really beautiful language in the judgment that, gives us sort of a leeway and direction on how we should move. Yeah.
All right, I've got to thank you for your time. Anna Molai-Chalmers there joining me and just unpacking some of the implications of the judgment that came through in Botswana a few days ago.